Conservation Station. Conservation Station.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Conservation Station podcast, a conservation-focused podcast by the Cango Wildlife Ranch in partnership with the Cheetah Preservation Foundation and Wild Animal Volunteers. I am your host, Dr. Garrett Eriksen. Thank you so much for joining us. Today's topic, very interesting topic, I think, vultures and their roles in the ecosystems, their importance as scavengers, the threats they're facing globally, but especially in South Africa, and the role of education and public outreach in vulture conservation. I'm fascinated by vultures and vulture conservation in particular. I think it's such an important topic. So I sought out none other than Kerri Wolter from VulPro, who's works in a leader organization in vulture conservation. And she will introduce us to this very underappreciated species, or these underappreciated species. So Kerri is the founder and director of VulPro, which I believe is short for Vulture Program. It's surely not Vulture Professional. It's based in Hartbeespoort in South Africa. They are renowned for their passion and dedication to the protection and rehabilitation of vultures. They have over 15 years of experience in conservation, education, and research focused on African vulture species. VulPro has gained recognition as one of the leading organizations in vulture conservation, tackling threats such as poisoning, electrocutions, and habitat loss. So, Kerri, is there anything else you'd like to add to that, or did I get hit the nail on the head?
I think we have just got a couple more years of experience under our belt now.
Uh-huh.
I think so. I personally have been doing it for 21 years, and I think VulPro has been going now for 17 years. But otherwise, I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Okay, fantastic. So my information is only a handful of years out of date, but I'll blame Google for that one. But thanks, Kerri. Okay, so I'm very excited. I think what a lot of people don't realize as well is that Cango Wildlife Ranch and VulPro have a fairly long working history together with vultures and such. So maybe before we get into our primary topic about vultures and such, we can just quickly lay out that relationship. I think I think almost 10 years now at this point, perhaps longer. We've been helping with vulture rehabilitation and taking in vultures where needed. And of course, VulPro has been a key player in helping us make sure that our vultures are happy, healthy. And then, of course, when we get to release them, which I think we did a release a bit earlier this year, and that was just beautiful to see, if I remember correctly.
Correct, yes. Yeah. Our relationship, is about 10 years. I've known Narinda for much longer, actually. When Narinda was actually first working at the Cheetah Center, that's where I actually first met Narinda. But our relationship with Cango has been going on for quite some time now. And I think the two of us work really, really well together, and vultures have definitely benefited from that relationship. When there are issues of injured or grounded vultures in the Western Cape, Cango is definitely our go-to organization to assist us with those cases.
I think we're very proud to be part of that organizational ability. And I just also mentioned for our listeners that Narinda is our assistant director of zoological affairs at the ranch. So all the buck stops with her as far as animals go. And I'm very glad that you guys had such a good, long working relationship. It's definitely, I think, just personally out, like, I'm not a vulture expert or anything, but when I see our vultures, they seem to be happy, they seem to be healthy, and I think that's all we can ask for in these kind of situations. Especially many of them, they can't be released back into the wild. They just don't have the physical capability, or they're injured or anything along those lines. So being able to be a safe haven for them, but to also educate the public. I think people, when they come to our vulture exhibits and they get to see them hopping around and eating the meat, and we have this big I love it. It's one of my favorite pieces. We have this big sign where you can get the vulture wingspan. You can kind of stand right there. And, especially your Cape vultures and your bigger vultures, they just, it goes on forever. As big as a person is, they can never get the arm out right. And I think it's just very cool to kind of see that, how big that wingspan is. And, if you get to see them in the wild and you get to see them circling in the air on the the drafts and things. I think it's a very beautiful thing. But anyway, okay, I could go on. It's almost like I'm the one who's wanting to work for VulPro here. I go on about them. Okay, so a couple of topics we can cover. Why don't we break it down then for our listeners from the beginning? Tell us about, I think everyone knows what a vulture is, right? There's public, perceptions, and you got to the TV and movies. We all know they sit on branches and they're waiting for someone to die or something to die, and they'll hop along and, eat them. And we've seen them in Lion King, we've seen them in Jungle Book, all those things. And there's always a very particular, I want to say, perception around them as kind of the undertakers of the wild. But they're actually, in many ways, they're kind of nature's cleanup crew. If we don't have them, we'd be like knee deep in animal carcasses in a year. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a bit more then about vultures and give us kind of like I want to say a schoolyard definition, so we know we're all talking about the same animal.
So I think you're spot on. I think many of us have watched Walt Disney movies or whatnot, and vultures are often portrayed as the villains. If there's going to be a character, it's going to be a vulture. And not only that, when a vehicle breaks down, we kind of refer to these tow trucks as the vultures in the car world as well. So, we often perceive vultures always have a negative connotation, and so I don't think that's done them any justice. And I think cinematography has also not been very kind to them. Yes, vultures are scavengers, so they only eat dead animals. But they're incredibly, incredibly important. And I think that perception has not really been portrayed correctly. Often they're portrayed specifically in like Walt Disney, is that they're waiting for an animal to die. No, vultures don't sit and wait for an animal to die. They're not sitting on a tree looking down at an animal or a person and waiting for them to die. Life goes on, and they...
I find that fascinating. So it's much like, because I love reptiles. I work with reptiles a lot, and obviously there's a lot of myths and perceptions around it, especially things like, they'll hypnotize you, or they'll chase you, or you have to suck out the poison if they bite you, crazy things like that. And up until you said that, I didn't realize that vultures don't, I won't say they don't sit and wait, but I did kind of perceive that if there's an animal that's sick and likely to die, that they would hang around nearby waiting for a chance to eat it as soon as it dies. But you're saying that's not the case, which I find, and again, it's how pervasive these myths are. It's not something that's ever been corrected in my perception, so that's interesting. So okay, so then they'll how do they then find an animal to eat?
So firstly, we need vultures in our ecosystem in order to consume these dead animals to prevent diseases. And I think that is important, and that's important to understand. They are incredibly, in fact, the most efficient scavenger on the planet. And through the quick consumption of carcasses, they are able to reduce the spread of diseases, which, ultimately, if these dead animals are not consumed, potentially, and if they have died of an infectious disease, it could be catastrophic to our livestock, our wildlife, as well as the, even human population. So I think that is important and needs to be understood. How they find their food is by their incredible eyesight. So vultures can see about 6 kilometers away from them. And what happens is actually use indicator species. So they use crows, they use jackals, they use batalias, they use tawny eagles. So everything in a perfect world, is connected. And so vultures watch these indicator species, and they will then react accordingly. If a lion has made a kill, for example, in come your jackals, your hyenas, your crows, and your vultures are thermaling above us, and often way up, and we don't even see them flying high up above us. But they are actually looking as to what is going on the ground. And that is how they locate their next food source.
It's kind of like how fishermen will look out for gulls in, if they're out in the ocean, they will look out for a flock of gulls that might be diving into an area, and then that might give them an indication of where, to fish in some cases. So okay, that makes sense. So what is the upper limit of? Sorry, might jumping all over the place here because I'm asking these questions that I've always wanted to know. What is the upper limit of a thermal? I want to say glide. I don't know what the official term for it is. When a vulture's right at the top of a thermal draft, what is the upper limit of that?
Well, the highest has been a Ruppel's griffin or Ruppel's vulture at the same height as a jumbo airplane.
Oh wow!
So it is insane. The theory is
Yeah.
that bird was actually still alive, but yeah, that is the highest recorded flight of any vultures. So you're
Wow.
talking about huge distances. That's obviously
Yeah.
not the norm.
Yeah.
But that is, yeah,
It's
it
just
just
fascinating they
gives
could reach
you
that in the first place. Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Jeez.
So
Okay.
you know, they really are the kings and queens of our
Mm.
skies.
Mm. And is there obviously again the cleanup crew? You said the most efficient scavengers, and they will come in at the end. So you get your primary predators that will either take down the animal or they'll get to the sick animal first, and they'll eat a good portion of it, and then the vultures will come and clean up effectively afterwards. To what degree are they going to eat almost anything, or do they leave certain items out? I know I've read lots of reports before, like people who find missing hikers or something like that have been out for days, who have unfortunately passed away. And I'm talking more like in the not Himalayas, but more in like certain mountain ranges. And they'll be missing eyes and tongues and things like that. So obviously they go for more of the softer things first. Sorry, this might be getting a bit gross for listeners, but you're listening about vultures, so we're going to get in detail. But I'm just wondering, are there parts of a carcass that they will not eat specifically, or will they eat almost anything that they can find from the carcass?
So each species has its unique role to play. So your gyp species, which are, the vulture that we really see the most of, being the African whiteback vultures, the commonest vulture species, and then also the Cape vultures. So the Cape and the whitebacks very closely related. We call them, they're in the class of the gyps, and they are the bulk feeders. And what I mean by that is basically they're inside to outside feeders. So they're the ones that are going to eat the bulk of the meat, and they're the ones that they're going to eat the muscle. Okay. You then have your other species, your lappet face vultures. They're the ones that actually eat the hard sinews, so the ears, the tongue, the jaw, the skin. So believe it or not, your capes and your whitebacks are not actually able to eat the hard areas compared to your lappets and your white-headeds. You then have your smaller species, your hooded vultures. They come in at the end and they will eat like the sinews that are stuck to the bone, or little pieces of meat that have been scattered around the carcass site. So they're much smaller species and they kind of clean up after the vultures. And then, of course, you have your bearded vultures that specialize in consuming bones. So, all the vultures together in holistic manner can consume the entire carcass. Obviously, not all the bones, but within reason. I think it must also be understood that vultures are carnivorous species, so they don't actually eat the stomach content, but they will eat the casing of the stomach.
Right.
So same thing with the intestine. So they will eat the sac and all of that goes around it and that holds the stomach content, but they're not going to actually eat the insides of the stomach content of the stomach.
And it's quite interesting that obviously all these different species have evolved to fit specific niches. So as you say, some are bulk meat eaters, some go for the little bits and pieces around, some eat the harder pieces. And I don't know if it's in here, but I know that there's species in, I think it's North America, that will take the bones and drop them from a height to crack them open to get to the marrow. I don't know if any of our vultures do that.
That's the bearded vultures. So they specialize in bones. So beardeds do that, and they can also swallow, I think it's about a 20 to 30 centimeter bone, which is insane. But yes, they carry the and let it drop onto a hard surface in order to get the marrow.
Oh, it's I've seen documentary footage of like a vulture flying and dropping it, and it just cracks. It's crazy how they can they've evolved to fill these niches and these particular behaviors and such. So okay, I think then that gives us a good overview of what vultures do and whatnot. And it is, again, it's a shame that people perceive them so terribly when I almost want to say this is kind of indicative of our culture in general, society. I want to say almost from a a societal point of view, we tend to look down on cleaners, whether it's ants, whether it's vultures, whether it's dung beetles, whether it's janitors, people who clean up. We don't seem to mind the mess as long as we're not the ones involved in cleaning it up. So we've got this bad perception of, I want to say, almost of predators in general. Again, a lot of those Disney movies, your snakes and various other animals, anything that's not cute, anything that's not super marketable gets a bad rap. And I think vultures tend to get that a lot as well, which is unfortunate because, like you said, they fill such an important role. And if they weren't cleaning up these carcasses, as you said, again, there would be so much disease and pestilence roaming around. So with that in mind, and we'll get to what their threats are, the threats that they're facing are, but I want to almost say, how is your program helping re-educate people about how they're not actually as I want to say evil or dirty or whatever that people are perceiving? What is how do you change that perception?
I think the big thing is obviously at the center itself, when they come and see the birds for themselves, I think being close to them, they actually see that they are very different to what their perception was, or to what like cinematography has portrayed them as, and that they actually are quite beautiful. And when you're not at the facility, I think through imagery, I think showing their magnificence and their beauty and for who they are. I mean, to see a vulture up in flight it's awe-inspiring. It really is. I mean, to see these huge wings and their majestic flight is quite something. I mean, you cannot but kind of take a breath in awe. And again, to see them up close, they are really magnificent. And especially, when cinematography and whatever portrays them, often it's after a carcass, so they are dirty. They've just put their heads down a carcass. Yeah. But when you don't always see them like that, and you actually see them being clean, and you see their characters, I think that's really what changes people, is right. Being up close, right. Seeing that their personalities, seeing their kind of their peaceful demeanor, that there aren't these crazy, vicious, scary birds, and that they are pretty comical. I think that's really what it is. I
don't think many people would think of a vulture as comical. I suppose with any animal is up for some kind of shenanigans or doing something, tripping over themselves.
Absolutely. They're like a whole bunch of toddlers in kindergarten. And when one has one thing, they all want it and they all squabble. And even at a feeding site, you'll have a dominant female that comes in, and she's going to take charge of that carcass, and she's going to do high stepping and kicking, and she's going to run around and try and chase everyone off the carcass until she eventually decides to eat off it. I mean, I think half the time they end up fighting more than they are actually eating off the carcass. And it's very comical to watch, how they operate and their behaviors, and that is not shown generally, So I think from changing people's perceptions, it really is. It's about, showing the birds, showing their behaviors, not showing them feeding off a carcass, because yes, we know that that's what they do, but to show another side of them, to show them, raising a chick, incubating a chick, feeding a chick, how massive these birds are, but yet how gentle, sensitive, and loving they actually are. And in fact, us as human beings could potentially learn something from their parental behavior. Seeing their gentle side, I think, is really important in changing the perceptions that people have.
Yeah, I think again that's the problem with when we have I want to say again the less cute animals. People tend to perceive that their main undesirable trait is carried out through everything. They don't perceive them as good parents. They don't perceive them as kind and loving. I mean, I suppose if you went up and try hug the vulture, you probably wouldn't have a good time, but or at least not a wild vulture. But I think that's perhaps why VulPro and Cango get along so well, is because we have a similar approach, right? We want to take the mystery and the fear out of animal, not just encounters, but animal existence, and show that there's more to them than what our perception is, and that they're important, and we need to understand our relationship with them, and that their existence is not predicated on our decision whether they are cute or not, or necessary or not. They exist because they exist, and we should allow them that existence regardless of our opinion of them, and in fact encourage it.
100%.
Which then I think splits us nicely to what threats are they facing. I briefly covered them a bit earlier: poisoning, power lines, habitat destruction. I think a lot of animals are facing it, but I think that vultures in particular are really, really suffering under these threats, because they are, and I want to say, an overlooked species. People will, again, higher profile species, they might make quick changes for, depending on the result of it. But vultures, again, perhaps because of perception and because they're the ones at the end of the cleanup crew, they tend to be forgotten a lot more. What you guys are on the forefront there? What's happening?
So look, the biggest threat to vultures globally is poisoning. But one has to understand that there are facets to poisoning. So poisoning could be the threat, or it could be a method. So if we talk about poisoning as a threat, that would be, I would say, really around the poaching. I think we've all heard about poaching of rhinos, elephants, lions, and whatnot. But vultures often find a laced poison carcass before the targeted species.
Right.
And also, what is so catastrophic about these events is it's not just one lion or two lions, for example. It could be 600 vultures that are poisoned at one site. Also, your poachers are trying to get rid of vultures as indicators to a poached animal. And so they are directly persecuting and trying to get rid of vultures as indicators.
Of course, because the vultures are indicating where, like, a rhino or a elephant carcass might be to the rangers. So, oh, wow, I didn't even consider that. Yeah, that's terrible.
Exactly. But now, not only do you have that, these same poachers are seeing there's a financial gain to a dead vulture. And with the increase in vulture harvesting or vulture trade for belief-based purposes, vultures are obviously not being, it's not a secondary poisoning event anymore. Now it is, and this is where the threat actually is, the use of vultures for belief-based purposes, where vultures are actually being sought after, poison for the belief-based muti trade, and they are being killed, and this is actually on the increase. And in fact, in some parts of South Africa, it has led to localized extinction. A threat that has been addressed for many years. I can't take any credit for it. It's been addressed by Dr. Garrett Eriksen. Obviously, it's not 100% addressed, but he has made huge headway in it. Is where farmers are targeting your problem animals like jackals, caracals, leopards. I'm sure you guys deal with it with your cheetah work. Is they put laced carcass out for those targeted animals, as I said earlier on, and vultures end up locating it. And that's what we call secondary poisoning. So that the threat is actually human-wildlife conflict. So one has to understand from a poisoning perspective, there are different elements, whether it's a threat or whether it's a method. And then the last issue with poisoning is that of lead poisoning and lead toxicity. And this is often not intentional at all, and this is where hunters or reserve managers, farmers are using leaded ammunition, and those animals are then exposed or placed at feeding sites for vultures to consume, and they then in turn are being indirectly and without knowing being poisoned by lead toxicity. And so poisoning is really, really a big issue. I think for us in South Africa, one of the biggest issues besides belief-based purposes is power line collisions and electrocutions. We see cases almost on a daily basis, and we estimate we're probably only, finding maybe 10% of these individuals. And many, if they don't lose their lives, at the electrocution site, and if they survive, they are lost to the wild populations, because often they lose limbs, or their limbs have to be, their wings, for example, have to be amputated in order to save their lives. So they are lost and taken out of the wild population. So I would say those are the biggest issues: direct persecution.
Unfortunately, all of these threats are all human-induced. Vultures, they can withstand diseases, viruses, anything that is not man-made. The minute man gets involved, the results are potentially catastrophic to the bird.
I was saying to Mike Dennison from WESA in one of our previous interviews that it's all problems in nature in this regard are simultaneously created and solvable by people. We just continuously we continuously make our own beds and then complain about sleeping in them. And all of this, it's as you say, the poisoning, each one of those. I mean, these are animals that eat rotting carcasses. They've got very hardy constitutions, and yet we're still putting out food in such a way that will directly kill them. And our power lines as well, our habitat destruction. I was actually wondering, the place we said there's localized extinction, are they seeing an uptick in, I want to say disease and other issues because of the lack of animals eating the carcasses in the area?
I don't think they've looked at it that closely. It's in some reserves that it's happening.
Okay, so it's not widespread enough yet to really be. I mean, it's an issue, but yeah.
Yeah, not yet, but they're definitely starting. This year they've seen the localized extinction of white-headed vultures, for example, in Zululand.
Right.
Whitebacks are being decimated. Leopards, I think you're looking at 2 or 3, pairs that are left. So I think, as we've seen with the Asian vulture crisis, it took a few years for the devastation to actually be seen and to be noted.
That's unfortunately, humans, we're so short-sighted. It's one of the reasons why we're in a climate change problem, because we will cause the trouble 20 years ago and then only see the results now, and then go, oh, what do we do now? But in the meantime, we're still creating more problems now that we'll also only see in 20 years' time. So yeah, we need to get a bit more long-term in our thinking. But okay, so very, very simple question with, I'm sure, an incredibly complicated answer. What do we do?
I think the first thing is we need to have an appreciation for the birds, and I think part of our work and the work that you guys do is we need to create an emotional connection, because, I can, give you the theory as to how important vultures are, but so what?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, how does it impact you? How does it impact me? And, yes, it doesn't. And again, I can tell you how it's going to, but unless you are connected emotionally to a species, how does it actually draw at your heartstrings? And the only way to do that is to create an emotional connection. So my feeling, and my reach to the public is, go visit facilities, reputable facilities, go and learn about the birds and go and see how different they are to actually our perception and to what we think they are. And then from there, volunteer or support organizations, get involved, be part of the change.
Yeah.
And I think that is really important, is really be a part of the change. Unite with us and work with us to create a legacy.
I think that's very, very important points. And I think as well, while you were saying that, I was thinking, and I'm sure you guys do this, but school groups are always a big one. There'll always be a handful of kids who visit these things who get inspired in some way or another. But I think being able to create those relationships is so, so important. And I think kids are a lot easier to work with in that regard. They find things a lot more fascinating. I think we should take a lesson from that. As jaded adults, we should be a lot more willing to be awe-inspired. We should be a lot more willing to put aside our preconceived ew grosses or whatever and just see the animal for what it is and what it does and appreciate it. Even if I use myself as an example. I have been terrified of spiders since I was a child. Never really liked them. I've had a handful of experiences. If I told the stories now, people would I think start themselves not liking spiders as much, because I've had scares at certain times, try to open a tap to drink out of it, and there comes a spider almost into my mouth, things like that. So I have my reasons, but I early on decided, and I think it's just by virtue of being here at Cango for so long, that just because I don't like it doesn't mean it deserves to be harmed or anything along those lines. And I've gone out of my way. I've never fully gotten over spiders, but I've gone out of my way to build a better connection with them, or at the very least understand them. I've got a few in my room, and I hate mosquitoes more than anything else. So I let the spiders take care of that. They're serving their purpose. I was at a museum once, and there was a spider expert there, and he had a tarantula, and he's like, "Oh, come put on." Now, a few prior years, I'll be running away screaming, but I said, "Okay, you know what? I'm going to do this. Put the tarantula on me," and I put it on. I let it crawl up me and everything, and they even had a little thing of whiskey there. You could take a shot of Dutch courage beforehand just to make sure. I let it crawl on me, and I put it back. I promptly went into another room, and we're like, "Ah!" But I've worked on creating that connection with an animal that I don't like or don't understand, and I've worked to understand it. I've worked to improve myself, and again, I don't like them, but I understand and appreciate them, and I will go out of my way to, if there's a spider in my room and I don't want it there, I will try and get it out safely, without hurting it, without crushing it, because it serves its purpose. And again, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't need my permission. I shouldn't have to sit there and go, "Oh, you do your job, spider. Here's permission for you. I will not kill you." I should just, unless it's causing me harm, okay, in my case, causing me psychological harm, so I have to remove it, but I don't need to hurt it. And I think it's so important with vultures as well. And they're, I want to say, in people's minds, a step up from spiders. It's a lot easier to create a connection with a vulture than it is a spider. So people should be willing to go and explore those options and change that. And I think that's why museums exist. That's why I want to say reputable museums exist. That's why reputable zoos exist, reputable conservation centers, because the purpose behind them is to create that connection and that understanding. And I think, all the problems they're facing, the poisoning, the power lines, the habitat destruction, etc., if we understand better and have that relationship, we're less likely to then cause that harm, and even, as you say, to volunteer, to help, and to do more, and to not let things fall to the wayside just because we don't understand or appreciate them. And I think even, let's say, it's not just up to the general public. If you have someone who's working at Eskom or one of the big electricity companies somewhere in the continent, and they have a personal passion for making sure that vultures are okay, maybe they will lead a project, or at least a couple of presentations or something to the rest of their company to, or maybe they'll have a great idea. Oh, I've invented this new, unit that will protect vultures from crashing into our thing, and then they make money from that. And there's so much that could be done. And I was saying again to Mike, it's economics at the end of the day as well. Everything happens because of our perceived cost or profit from an action. But that can also be an emotional cost or profit. We can benefit emotionally and psychologically from creating these connections and protecting these animals and realizing where we are in the food chain. Sorry, waxed poetical there, but it's very important, I think. And I love it when people come to our facility and see these animals and have these connections. And I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to see people and their perceptions change, and the first thing we get is they're not actually that ugly.
Right?
Always. It's the first thing people say is that, oh, they're actually really beautiful. And that's what I love. And the next thing is, oh, they're clean. There's a whole misconception that vultures, stay dirty. And if you think about it, their feathers have to be meticulously clean for perfect flight. So they've got to be clean. And in fact, I always laugh, when we give talks to kids and we say, who goes and baths after every meal? And of course, nobody does. And we go, but vultures do.
Yeah.
Wait, so which one of the species? No.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Yeah.
So it's just a perception.
Yeah.
And I also think, everyone needs to understand, as you talk about spiders, everything is connected. Absolutely. Every species, fauna, flora, Absolutely everything is connected.
100%. And I think the more people spend time in these spaces, even if it's just being able to go for a hike once a week in the woods nearby, or just to their local, if they don't have the ability to hike or you live in a big city, go to your park, but don't just sit there and, stare at everyone in the park. Go and look at your tree. I used to do that all the time. I'd go into the parks and I would go look at the tree and I'd see all the ants, and I just, even if it's a busy park in an industrial area, I can still animals doing their thing, and you can see life forming, and you can create that relationship for yourself, even something as small as that, and appreciation. So no, I completely agree. And again, I think people sitting in a city, they might think, oh, what has this got to do with me? There aren't any vultures in my area. Number one, I think that there probably are vultures in their area, they just don't see them. And number two, even if there aren't, the impact of what happens in our rural areas directly impacts us. Everything from crop generation to, I want to say the workers' health who work on the farms. There's a lot of things that impact our ability to live in our comfortable bubble cities.
100%.
But Kerri, so in the interest of time, because we could talk about this forever, I think you and I are both very passionate about changing people's perceptions. I'd like to move on to our news segment, and there's a very interesting news I've heard about recently, where it seems you are up for an award, which online they're calling it the Nobel Prize of Conservation, but it's the 2025 Indianapolis Prize. Can you tell us about that? Sounds fascinating.
Sure. I think, as you say, it's been classified as a Nobel Prize. The winning take is $250,000.
Wow.
Which is a substantial amount of money to any conservation project.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's 44 of us that are that have been nominated, and then obviously that will come down to the finalists. I think that only happens next year, September. Obviously, the finalists get chosen sooner, but I think the gala event is next year, September. But I mean, you're talking about top conservationists on multiple species, throughout the world. So I think quite a slim chance of becoming a finalist, but I'm still very proud of being nominated and being up there with 44 top world conservationists, and putting vultures out there. I think, to me, that's what it's about. It's not about myself at all. It's about putting vultures out there, getting vultures out in the limelight, and also showcasing that it's a team effort. It's never an individual effort. Even if an individual is nominated, it really is a tribute to the team that has allowed the organization, and often the person at the top, being recognized, but it never is a one-man band. And I think that is important. And so for me, it really is. It's about the birds, getting the birds out there and showing what the VulPro team has actually done and is doing.
I think it's very important to emphasize that teamwork aspect, because again, I almost want to say it's not just the team on the ground doing the thing, but it's also the support of the public, who are in their own way part of the team, and they help and support, and they grow with that. So your accomplishments are their accomplishments, and vice versa, and it's great. And we have the same thing at Cango. All of our accreditations or awards are always because our team has just pulled so hard together, and the support of the public just brings us forward there. So no, I completely agree, and I think you guys should definitely be super proud of yourselves. And you know what? When you win, I'd love to do a follow-up. So in the future, yeah, I'll pencil it in. I'll pencil it in for next September. I'll check with you. But even if you don't win, I think it'll be great to maybe chat about it, because I'm sure between now and then, things will change, and I would think just being nominated puts you a bit more into not only the public eye, but into the network of other conservation facilities. And it's one of the reasons we're doing this podcast. I want to start creating networks and conversations with groups and people that might otherwise not have the opportunity to have these conversations and create these networks. And for our listeners, I would love for our listeners to walk away from this being able to, again, not only just receive a bit of an education about certain aspects of animals and conservation and everything, but also be able to create a connection and network with other groups and people and just concepts and ideas that maybe they didn't before. And maybe even, someone sitting there thinking they want to get into conservation as a career, and maybe something like this will inspire them to do that, So I can only hope. And as you say, everything's connected, right? Everything is interconnected and working together. That's what we're going for. Fantastic. Well, Kerri, then I think the final portion of our show here is about how listeners can get involved. So if I'm just a regular person, I'm listening to this podcast and I want to go, wow, I'd love to help out with Vultures and VulPro and just support. What can I do? So what can your average person do to help you out?
Okay, I think the first thing is to contact us, and you can get all our details on our website. And yeah, come get involved, come volunteer. We love getting volunteers. You can come, spend 2-3 weeks with us. You can help out in the busy field season. So you can help undertake tree nesting surveys, cliff nesting monitoring. You can get involved in captive breeding, and you can also be a regular volunteer if there's a vulture that needs to be rescued. We're trying to build up our volunteer base, so join our volunteer group, which you'll become a member. You'll be added to our WhatsApp group, and we will offer training. And we're always looking for keen volunteers that are eager to put, one day aside. Maybe it's a 1 day a month, whatever that, come to the facility and come unite with us. And
fantastic.
Change.
And how would they get hold of you if they wanted to get involved?
So I think the best is if you go to our website. I'll give you our website address, which is www.vulpro.com, and it's VulPro, VulPro. Or you can email Nicole, which is admin@vulpro.com. Pretty easy email address. And I think that's probably the easiest way of connecting with us.
Fantastic. And I will share all these links in the show notes, including the social media links and such, so you guys can give them a follow and see the work they do. And I think there's I've seen some great, Instagram clips and things. Again, it's about that awe-inspiring beauty of these animals. So fantastic. And Kerri, our final question, I ask all our guests this. I want to say, what is your highlighted animal? So if you had to pick one animal that you want to highlight out of your life, out of your career, that you want people to know more about specifically, what would that animal be?
It always has to be Percy. I think everyone knows Percy, who knows VulPro. But to me, Percy was and is the reason why VulPro is here today. Oh. He's now 18 years old, and he was the one who changed me. And this is why VulPro exists, is, having Percy when he was 10 days old in my hand, I realized the fragility of the species. But not only that, I realized that vultures are reliant on man for their survival. And so to me, if there's anyone, it's Percy, who's a Cape vulture. And he was my change.
Oh, that's beautiful. Percy the Cape vulture. And you know what? The fact that he's responsible for VulPro and everything, again, shows the power of that connection. And just him existing propelled you forward like that. And that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Kerri. I think this has been a fantastic interview. And I'm at a loss for words, which is unusual for me, about how I think strongly you feel about it and everything. So yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'll put all the details and everything into the show notes. If anyone would like to get in touch with us here at the podcast, you can email podcast@cango.co.za. That's cango.co.za. And the website for the podcast is conservationstation.co.za. And everything else will be in the show notes. And we hope to see you next show. Thank you so much again, Kerri, and have a great one.
My pleasure. You too. Cheers.
Hey everyone, Garrett here. Thanks for tuning in to the Conservation Station podcast. We loved putting this episode together, and we hope you found it as exciting and insightful as we did. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, review, and subscribe. It really helps us reach more listeners. And if you have any thoughts or questions, drop a comment. I read them all, and I would love to hear from you. If you'd like to learn about today's guest or topic, check out the show notes for all the details. For more conservation stories and updates, visit our website at www.conservationstation.co.za. You can also get in touch with us directly by emailing podcast@cango.co.za. That's cango.co.za. We're proud to support conservation initiatives like the Cango Wildlife Ranch, the Cheetah Preservation Foundation, and wild animal volunteers. If you'd like to learn more about them or get involved, please visit www.cangowildlife.com. That's CANGO wildlife.com. Thanks again for being part of our conservation community, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Conservation Station.